This is All India Radio. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on Mission Life, an India-led global mass movement to protect and preserve environment. The participants are Ashish Chaturvedi, Head of the Environment, Energy and Resilience at UNDP India, and Omvesh Upadhyay, AIR Correspondent.
In the view of the danger lurking around the nature, ecosystem and environment, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on 20 October 2022 unveiled the Action Plan for Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment, an India-led global mass movement that will nudge individuals and communities for action to protect and preserve the environment. Before starting the discussion, let's listen what Prime Minister Modi said on the launch day of Life Mission about the need and significance of lifestyle for environment.
क्लाइमेट चेंज से हो रहे बदलाव लोग अपने आसपास महसूस करने लगे हैं। पिछले कुछ दशकों में हमने इस प्रभाव को और तेज देखा है। अप्रत्याशित आपदाओं को झेला है। आज हमारे ग्लेशियर्स पिघल रहे हैं, समुद्रों का जलस्तर बढ़ रहा है, हमारी नदियां सूख रही है, मौसम अनिश्चित हो रहे हैं और ये बदलाव लोगों को सोचने पर मजबूर कर रहे हैं कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के मुद्दे को सिर्फ पॉलिसी मेकिंग के लेवल पर ही नहीं छोड़ा जा सकता। लोग खुद महसूस करने लगे हैं कि एक व्यक्ति, एक परिवार और एक समुदाय के तौर पर उन्हें इस धरती के लिए, इस प्लेनेट के लिए कुछ न कुछ जिम्मेवारी उठानी चाहिए, खुद ने भी कुछ करना चाहिए। लोग जानना चाहते हैं कि अपने खुद के प्रयत्न में या परिवार के साथ और अपने समुदाय के साथ मिलकर वो कौन से कदम उठा सकते हैं जिससे धरती की सुरक्षा हो सके, इस पृथ्वी की सुरक्षा हो सके। इन सारे सवालों का जवाब मिशन लाइफ में है। मिशन लाइफ का मंत्र है लाइफस्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट। पृथ्वी पर रहने वाले प्रत्येक व्यक्ति को व्यक्तिगत प्रयासों की कामना के साथ ही आज ये मिशन लाइफ का ये विजन दुनिया के सामने रख रहा हूं। मिशन लाइफ इस धरती की सुरक्षा के लिए जन जन की शक्तियों को जोड़ता है, उनका बेहतर इस्तेमाल करना सिखाता है। मिशन लाइफ क्लाइमेट चेंज के खिलाफ लड़ाई का लोकतांत्रिक डेमोक्रेटिक एक प्रकार से उसका विस्तार कर रहा है, जिससे हर कोई अपने सामर्थ्य के हिसाब से योगदान दे सकता है। मिशन लाइफ इस बात पर भरोसा करता है कि छोटे छोटे प्रयासों का भी व्यापक प्रभाव हो सकता है। मिशन लाइफ हमें प्रेरित करता है कि हम सब अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में ऐसा बहुत कुछ कर सकते हैं जिससे पर्यावरण की सुरक्षा हो।
Today, to discuss on the lifestyle for environment, we have with us Shri Ashish Chaturvedi ji. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Ashish ji, in the very beginning, I would like to know what exactly is the mission life and how great a significance does this hold, keeping in mind the state of rapid climate change.
So Mission Life was essentially launched by the Prime Minister as early as COP26. So which happened in Glasgow. This was a COP before the one which just recently concluded in Egypt at Sharm el-Sheikh. However, the antecedents and the need, as you can say, for Mission Life was actually enshrined in the Paris Agreement at the insistence of India in the sort of preamble of the Paris Agreement, which actually mentioned the propagation of sustainable lifestyles as a key element of keeping global warming to a manageable level. So, well, within 1.5 degrees preferably, but definitely below 2 degrees. So, Mission Life basically began as early as preamble of the Paris Agreement. As you mentioned in your remarks already, the Prime Minister launched it officially on 20th of October with the UN Secretary General, who was in Gujarat at the Statue of Unity at Kevadia, and I had the pleasure of being there in person as well. And I think this is where the global call for Mission Life was launched. And before that, in June this year on World Environment Day, the Prime Minister had actually launched a global call for ideas on Mission Life, which is going to conclude on 31st of December this year. So there is an entire program of activities which has led to the definition of this program called Mission Life. What it essentially contains is this idea of getting as much citizen participation as possible, because the Prime Minister has called for how individuals can actually drive climate action as well. It cannot be too distant from our individual choices. All our individual choices, from the kinds of things we eat, the way we move, the kind of clothes we wear, every individual consumption decision has an impact on the environment and also on the climate. And therefore, individual participation and the choices individuals make will have a significant impact on how the climate is affected. And this is essentially what is the crux behind the Mission Life. There, according to the Niti Aayog, there are 75 actions which have been identified which can be taken by individuals to improve their adherence to the principles of Mission Life.
Indeed, and you talked about how ideas were invited by government regarding the mission lifestyle. When we talk about that mission life is set to follow the participative approach, I know that you said about this, but could you please elaborate more about it? How does it include the citizens in front in the playing role?
So India's had a tradition of living in harmony with nature. If you even look around you, and especially if you talk to people of sort of the generation of your mother, sort of my mother or my grandmother, sort of they were living fairly well within the means, either because of choice, but also because of constraints which were imposed by availability of certain resources. So we've had a certain kind of tradition. Even the most affluent did not necessarily live at the expense of nature traditionally. However, over the last few sort of decades, we've seen that there is a certain class of people within this country, but also globally, who are definitely living much beyond the means of our natural carrying capacity of this planet. Right? So by carrying capacity, I mean what the kind of resources which are available. And recent figures suggest that if everybody starts living, that we need 2 Earths, resources of 2 Earths, to maintain the standard and the kind of quality of living that we have kind of gotten used to. So this is clearly not sustainable. And if this is not sustainable, then who are the sort of key actors who can drive this sustainable behavior? I think, of course, large corporations do have a significant role to play in terms of what kind of products they make. But similarly, individuals, consumers who are actually making that buying decision also have agency. So in order to give individuals the agency, the participatory power, it is good to kind of give a call for participation by all the consumers, individual consumers. And this is precisely what the Mission Life does. It gives a call, like a clarion call, to individuals from around the world to make strong, positive consumption choices and to also get them to sort of acknowledge that their consumption decisions are actually going to have a significant impact on the sustainability of our planet. And in order to make it more participatory, this is where the idea competition, which has been launched on World Environment Day in 2022, it's basically looking for how to enhance community participation, individual participation, by either giving them some incentives or by giving them nudges, or maybe on occasions through policy push as well. For instance, I can give you an example of how you can do this very pragmatically. If remote controls for air conditioning are kind of set at a particular preset of, instead of setting them at 24 degrees Celsius, you could also set them at 25. Just that 1 degree change can actually lead to very significant reductions in carbon dioxide emissions around the world. Similarly, if by policy you can make public transportation much more attractive, and in some cases Indian cities are already trying to do that, incentivize public sort of transportation, I think that will have significant impact on how people make those choices as well. And I think this is precisely what this mission is trying to do, to look at policy, to look at incentives, to look at maybe sort of nudges to push sustainable consumption behavior.
Indeed, and I would like to state a fact here that India, if I'm not wrong, constitute around 17% of the world's population, but India's contribution to global carbon emissions is only 4%. Despite not being part of the problem in that big ways, our numerous global initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India has taken the lead in presenting and building solutions for the world by bringing the global community together. So can we call our country a trendsetter who is continuously working towards the betterment of the environment, Ashish ji?
See, we can claim credit for a lot of things, but I think we have challenges as well, and I think both have to be acknowledged. So the list of things that you mentioned with the International Solar Alliance, CDRI, the OSO award, this One Sun, One World, One Grid, all of these are great initiatives, and they need to be promoted, and they need to be upscaled, and they need to be brought to the global map. And I think India is already doing that under the G20 presidency. Of course, India is also going to push a lot of these agendas with its own priorities. But I think we also need to do more domestically. And although we are already on a good way in the recent ratings, the Climate Action Tracker ratings also mention India in the top 3 or 5. I don't remember exactly the number, but India is doing fairly well. But we can do more. And of course, we don't have to do more just to please the rest of the world. I think it is in our own interest to scale up some of these initiatives. And I think life is a great example. We have substantive portions of our own populations which are living quite unsustainably. And of course, that number in percentage terms might be small, but in absolute numbers, because of the size of our population, those numbers can actually get quite inflated as well. So I think we have to keep that at the back of our minds, that there is enough and more of a constituency within our own country, which should also be kind of pushing this agenda of sustainable lifestyles. And if you look around you, you know who these people are. In large cities, in sort of smaller towns, you can see really sort of wasteful consumption of different kinds. And also the new generation seems to be also adopting some of these behaviors, which I think can be moderated through the adoption of Mission Life. But having said that, I think I'm completely in alignment with the suggestion that, Mission Life is another one of these global initiatives. So I think we should think of it as a global initiative. It's not necessarily an India initiative. It's an initiative which is originated in our country, but it's a global initiative because the challenges that have been created in other parts of the world are actually a much bigger contributor to the global climate change. And in fact, Mission Life should really be pushed in those other parts of the world as well, not only in our pockets and niches within India, but also in significant numbers of people in maybe, well, for the lack of a better phrase, developed countries who have appropriated a significant portion of the global carbon space, but they can also now be, exhorted to adopt more sustainable lifestyles.
Indeed, and very rightly you said that although it was originated in India, but it is our global movement. You mentioned briefly about India's G20 presidency and how India will likely give a thrust to lifestyle for environment thing. Could you please elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yeah, so I think as far as I know and to the best of our knowledge, lifestyles for environment is going to be critical cross-cutting priority of the Indian G20 presidency. And I think it fits into several different agendas. Of course, it's about environment, climate, sustainability as a priority area, but it's also about agriculture. It's also about, because the kind of food we eat, the kind of energy choices, so it's definitely a part of the energy transition working group that is part of the G20. It's definitely a developmental priority because Mission Life would cut across different kinds of economic sectors, but also about social indicators, about the environmental indicators as well. So I think it's going to feature quite broadly in the agenda of India's G20 presidency. And I think it remains to be seen how it is received by different parts of the G20, different countries which are a part of the G20. But I believe that it has great potential for arriving at some kind of collective positioning on how we work with our populations who seem to believe that governments are not doing enough on climate change. So I think it's basically about getting citizen participation. It's also making citizens a critical actor on climate action and not only about sort of recipients. And I think it also has this transversal option, impact of creating citizenry which is demanding more change as well. So if citizens say that we are doing so much adopting these lifestyles for environment, our government should also do much more as far as environment is concerned. So there's this feedback process which can be triggered by the adoption of this or spreading of this movement. And I think for all of these reasons, the push by the Indian presidency on life can have significant impacts across the G20 countries to begin with. But of course, because the G20 countries have like 80% of global population, around 80-85% of the global GDP, of course, if it's adopted in the G20, then if it's supported by the G20, then it can be pushed in the rest of the world as well.
Ashish ji, you were very rightly saying about things that how India will take the mission life forward globally in the G20 presidency. I would also like to talk about one thing that when PM launched the mission lifestyle in October this year, he also talked about that how migration to cities is a recurring issue and we have to keep that point in mind as well. Under the action plan of Mission Life, one objective is to practice local and traditional so that our lifestyle doesn't affect the environment at current or greater level. What do you say about this? Because you in the very beginning talked about that we are the generation who had this upbringing and practices of going local, taking the traditional way of things. And it was in our lifestyle that we always preferred sustainable ways. Could you say something about that?
Well, I can give you this example of how, the clothes from one siblings would go from one elder sibling to a younger sibling.
Indeed.
And this is pretty standard practice.
Yeah.
Right? And then, of course, when the clothes got older and they were about to be discarded, you would actually donate them and barter them for other things. I remember that in where I used to stay, my mother would exchange them for utensils. Where somebody would come to your place, they would take all the old clothes and then give you some small utensil, which was like a reward for doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is traditionally part of what we've been doing. But of course, I'm saying that I also acknowledge that we're not everybody in currently, and especially those who are much more affluent, do not necessarily follow these choices, because it's also aspirational to not be sustainable in certain pockets of our societies. And it's also because these choices, the kind of style of living that some countries in the West have adopted or more developed countries have adopted also seems sort of more aspirational, like changing a television even when if it is working, or changing a car even like just because society demands it or your social status demands it. So I think those are kinds of pressures that are created by different kinds of living styles, lifestyles, and the Prime Minister's call for kind of adhering to certain sustainable, mindful utilization of resources also allows us to kind of rethink some of these choices that we are making. And I think not everything that you do will come into conflict with the economy. So a lot of people might believe that if you become more sustainable, you necessarily reduce consumption. I don't think sustainable consumption is necessarily always about reduced consumption. Maybe in some parts of the world it is about reduced consumption. Maybe in other parts of the world it's about more sensible consumption. And maybe in the poorest parts of the world it is about more consumption because they're consuming unsustainably low. But it's also always about thinking about what is the right type of consumption. For instance, one can always think about the kind of food choices we are making. What kind of impact does it have on the local environment? Do we start having millets instead of eating sort of certain other staple crops that we are used to? Because millets are much more sustainable, they use much less water, and they're much hardier, they're much more climate resilient as well.
Indeed.
And they were anyway part of our traditional diet. Yes.
I really agree with your point, and I think the listeners will also enjoy when you share that what generational things that we learn by sharing. It is very important, whether it be clothes in between siblings or not wasting food, the little changes that you were talking about. It brings me to my next question that you were talking about, is that how millet will be a better option for agricultural lands and countries, because we are talking about life as a global movement, in which PM also talked about inclusion of millets in diet, as it's not only highly nutritious and fiber rich, but it takes a lesser amount of water, so it would be a better option for drier agricultural lands in global movement for countries like Africa. How do you see that?
So the Africans have traditionally consumed a lot more millets anywhere in the world. So as compared to a lot of other parts of the world, the Africans were and still consume a lot more millets. In India also traditionally we had a lot more millets than we have them now because of our agriculture policies, because of our support to the kind of pricing of certain crops like rice and wheat, especially to mention these two crops. Of course, there's been kind of a transition in our food choices. The millet choice is definitely also, the Prime Minister's call is also reflected in the announcement of the International Year of Millets next year in 2023, so which also coincides with our G20 presidency. And definitely, yeah, millets is almost like a no-brainer. It is good for your body, it's good for the environment, it's much more resilient to the sort of the changing climatic conditions. But yeah, we need, what kind of support do we need? And I think by including millets in midday meal schemes, by including millets-based sort of processed foods, so that it also becomes a part of the fashion that a lot of people have, like, okay, why use cornflakes, why not use millet flakes? There are already niche markets which exist, so you can expand those. And then, of course, maybe also have minimal support price for millets, which are comparable to the staple crops. And I think this is where farmers would then be able to move on to the choices of kind of growing some of these crops as well. So I think millets do make a lot of sense, and it's a niche crop.
Ashish ji, how new technology and energy-saving inventions can help in this mission for life?
So life, as we've talked about earlier, life is basically about promoting sustainable choices, sustainable consumption choices. So if you start thinking about energy use, most of our energy globally still comes from fossil fuels. And these are, of course, non-renewable. They're non-renewables. What we need is more renewable sources of energy. So if you can, the best energy sort of consumed is the one which is saved. So like, how can you avoid energy consumption? How can you use more energy efficient appliances? And with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency's sort of introduction of star labels, you've seen how energy consumption and more energy efficient appliances can actually transform the energy consumption profile of a household. So similarly, like if you have 5-star air conditions, they can of course have much less impact on the environment as compared to energy guzzling air conditions. Similarly, fans, similarly LED bulbs. So all of this is the bedrock of all of this innovation is technology. And I think this is where we will have to really use our best available technologies, which are available at reasonable costs within the country, but also look at best available technologies from around the world to leapfrog some of these energy like efficient appliances and energy efficient choices that we make on the demand side. And similarly, we'll have to make innovations in technology as far as energy provision is concerned. So looking at innovations for solar energy, for wind energy, but also other alternative energy sources, which are much more renewable, which are, of course, and bring down the cost of those renewable energy, which Government of India is trying to do. I think technology is going to underpin both the supply side and the demand side of energy choices, but also similar examples can also exist in other sectors, from food, from clothing, from textiles, from housing, all of these different sectors.
Prime Minister Modi also emphasized on role of United Nations in promoting Mission Life globally. Prime Minister Modi said,
मुझे विश्वास है कि संयुक्त राष्ट्र के समर्थन से मिशन लाइफ को विश्व के हर कोने में, हर देश में, हर नागरिक तक पहुंचाने में बहुत बड़ी सफलता मिलेगी। हमें एक मंत्र को याद रखना है, प्रकृति रक्षति रक्षिता, अर्थात जो प्रकृति की रक्षा करते हैं, प्रकृति उनकी रक्षा करती है। मुझे विश्वास है इसी मिशन लाइफ पर चलते हुए एक बेहतर दुनिया का निर्माण कर पाएंगे।
Ashish ji, nearly 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are by household or lifestyle related consumptions. When you look at the 17 SDGs by the UN, Goal 12 talk about sustainable consumption and production. How does SDG 12 and Mission Life together can strengthen the sustainable lifestyle goal?
So life, although it's kind of eminently directly related to Goal 12, which focuses on sustainable consumption and production, it kind of touches upon a lot of other sustainable development goals. So it, of course, touches upon waste management, on energy, on food security, on buildings. So I think, and all of these are covered by different sustainable development goals. on how about sort of life on land, life under water. All of these will be affected by the consumption choices that we make. So although we are talking about direct linkages between life and the SDG 12, but as far as we've just recently done a mapping, and life can actually be linked to more than 12 of the 17 SDGs. So well, definitely 12 for sure, and maybe more. So I think this is because it is about on the demand side of choice, or the choices that consumers are making, it will have an implication cutting across several SDGs. And I think it brings a lot of life to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by kind of linking consumer behavior and consumer choices to the achievement of several Sustainable Development Goals, which all of these have to be achieved by 2030. So the Prime Minister's call is coming almost sort of at the midterm of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2015, but have to be achieved by 2030. And we are like 7 years, or the 7 years have ended. So we have another 7.5, 8 years for the achievement of the SDGs. So this is the right time to really think about what is the push that could be provided to the achievement of the SDGs. And life could potentially contribute to that push as well. Of course, we need a lot of other interventions, but I think life does that for the achievement of SDGs as well.
Indeed. And in the very concluding question, I would like to know that recently a 21-day challenge by the Government of India has started about inviting citizens to take a pledge for reducing their carbon footprint. In the era of digitalization, social media is a powerful and influential tool. How do you think government and as a society we can use social media to promote Mission Life to every individual out there?
Well, so fortunately or unfortunately, we live a lot of our lives on social media these days. And I think consumer behavior is shaped heavily by, and I think this is much to the delight of some people, I'm one of them, that your consumer behavior is also shaped by what trends you see on social media. So social media is heavily influential. It can be sort of used as a positive influence as well. And life, because it is about kind of getting people to also be influenced by the right things, by right choices, I think social media can definitely play a big role. You can, if influencers, and of course Prime Minister is an influencer, but so are a lot of other sort of people who are kind of have massive following on social media. I think if there are challenges being announced, some people might be inspired to take up some of those challenges. However, I think social media action can be transitory as well. And I think we should keep that at the back of our minds, that it might be fashionable to say certain things on social media, but might not necessarily be followed up in real life. People won't necessarily do everything that they see in social media in real life as well. And we should keep that in the back of our minds, and really have multiple strategies and multiple channels through which we try and kind of shape and influence consumer behavior in the right direction. Social media can play a role, digital instruments can play a role, but exclusive reliance could necessarily be at odds with sustainable lifestyles themselves. Maybe a lot of our lives should be led in the real world, not necessarily in the digital world. It might be much better to sort of, go out the public park and take 5 rounds around the public park rather than sitting and tootling on Twitter or on Instagram or whatever the fixation of the individual is on social media.
Indeed, not only social media, but a multi-dimensional approach can help us get fruitful results from Mission Lifestyle. Thank you so much, Ashish ji, for joining us today and having this meaningful and deep conversation with All India Radio. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
You were listening to a discussion on Mission Life, an India-led global mass movement to protect and preserve environment. The participants were Ashish Chaturvedi, Head of the Environment, Energy and Resilience at UNDP India, and Omvesh Upadhyay, AIR Correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.